Hi everybody and welcome to this video in which I would like to talk a little bit about the Grand Swiss and in particular its winner Anish Giri and the way in which he won this very important prestigious event. Now, as some of you may know, you may have noticed me in the live stream of the Grand Swiss, and the reason for that was because I was there in the playing hall uh, serving as a fair play officer, making sure that everything went well in the event. Apart from doing my job, obviously I had a very good, unique opportunity to see the players up and close. And I have to tell you that it's a completely different experience following the games in the playing hall, looking at the players basically next to you, and following the games from home with or without commentary, with or without engine. It's irrelevant. The main difference is that when you are there next to the players, you actually get to understand, you get to feel their, let's say, psychological state and the small facial reactions that you may easily miss in a live stream, even if you're following it at all times, because the players can walk around and you don't see them then, but when you're there in the playing hall you see everything. And this is, for me at least, invaluable because it gives this extra information that you cannot really get from the moves, you cannot get it from the live stream, you cannot get it from the commentary. And one thing I noted, in fact, as I was there day after day, is that for the first time ever, in fact, Anish Giri looked, afraid I'll have to say this word, but somewhat old. I know how that sounds for a person who is 31, but perhaps old even is not the best word. What I saw was some sort of tiredness in his expression, but maybe I was being mistaken, or I took it for as fatigue, which was in fact determination and seriousness, this grave seriousness that was expressed, that was on his face every day. And then later I understood that actually that was his exactly determination and his willingness to finally win big events, to break through and make it to the candidates. And I think in the end this was the decisive factor, because of all the competitors who had a chance to win in the last round and qualify, he was the only one who managed. And in this video I will show you this crucial last round game played against Hans Niemann. And what made it really interesting was that in case of a win, any player who won in the last round on the top boards could have, in fact, and would have qualified for the candidates. As we know by now, only Anish Giri managed. And what was curious for me is that as I was following the games, and especially this one, I was hoping for a different type of game, and I was really surprised, especially by Niemann's first opening choice and then the way he played this decisive game, knowing that the win would qualify him for the candidates and playing in the way, as we shall see, was really odd to me and surprising, but it is what it is, yeah, as they say. So let's, without further ado, let's move on to the moves of the game, and let's see how it went. So c4, move 1 by Giri. You know, if you know your history, chess history, you know that in the decisive 24th game of the match in Seville between Kasparov and Karpov, Kasparov was trailing by a point and he had to win the last 24th game to remain a world champion, and he opened the game with the move d4. As we know, he won that game, and here Giri follows a good example from the past. It's worth noting that c4 does offer more possibilities for independent play and to get a game, because after d4 and e4 there exist a lot of lines where black can try to kill the game off. Nevertheless, with c4 also offers black to choose his setup, and the setup Niemann chose is considered one of the most solid ones, But this was a surprising choice for me, because in a game where a win would give him a candidate spot, playing just to keep it solid and not even have chances to take over the initiative was, I don't know, a bit, I would say, prospectless. Yeah. So knight f6, knight c3, e5, knight f3, knight c6, e3. So e3 lines. Ding Liren played them in his World Championship matches, especially against Nepomniachtchi. And okay, they are a bit different than the g3 lines. Again, the idea is to try to get a game and avoid the vast masses of theory. Bishop b4 is the main move, queen c2, now take on c3. All this is theory. It's curious that in that game I mentioned, Ding took with b takes c3, but suddenly it turned out that in one later game with the black pieces Jordan Van Forest was playing, he sacrificed the pawn with the move e4 later on, and he just gave up a pawn, and he made a draw without an effort in what seems like a fortress very quickly out of the opening. Pawn down, but fortress. I think it went something like this. Let's say e4, knight g5, queen e7, f3, something like d6, and then massive exchanges on e4, something like this. And it turned out that black cannot win. It was something like this. Yeah, you can check that game, Van Forest with black. But okay, queen c3 is the main move. Queen e7, a3, covering the b4 square, intending b4 maybe in the future, and now d5. This is a great line for black, but the problem is that black never really gets a chance to play for a win. And this is what surprised me. So the point is that I understand playing solid is fine when you're trying to draw fire on yourself, and that can backfire for the aggressive side. But here white, I don't see a scenario where white could overpress and give black a chance to win. Because after again forcing d4, e4, knight d4, knight d4, queen d4, c5, queen h4, bishop e6, cd5. Now the queens will inevitably be exchanged. And how can white overpress in this endgame? Pair of bishops. Only white can play for a very long time, and there is not an imaginable scenario where white can risk losing. This is why Niemann's opening choice surprised me. He did not put himself in a situation where he could get a realistic chance of winning this game. Knight d5 was played. Bishop d5 would lead to something similar. After bishop b5, knight d7, take on e7, king e7, bishop d2, knight d5. It's another version of this endgame. I've analyzed this quite a bit from white's point of view, and I have to say that analyzing these positions, like if you don't put the engine on, they look great. They'll just make some move, let's say knight d5. Now mostly I analyzed queen e7, but it would lead to the same position. Queen e7, knight e7, check, and then bishop e2. It just would be very similar. Giri gave the check, bishop b5, bishop d7, take on e7, knight e7, bishop e2, and here we are. The thing is that you look at this position from a human perspective and you say, okay, this is ideal. Pair of bishops, asymmetrical pawn structure, mobile pawn majority on the king side in the center, no risk, amazing. Then you switch the engine on, it just gives you zeros. And not only that, it also gives you convincing ways how black can hold this without too many problems. I think this was a great choice for Giri, because after all, humans play the game. The engine would draw it without problems, obviously, but for a human, these long-term factors are important. And as we will see, I think Niemann wasn't at his best, even though he played a great tournament before that. And he played in a way like kind of, I don't know which word to use, somewhat like lame, without energy. Even his composure, his behavior at the board was kind of listless and kind of not really believing that was his day, that he would actually make it. And this, I think, was shown in the game. So a great opening start for Giri, and now all that remains is to kind of make use of these long-term factors. Now rook c8 was played, but before continuing with the game, I want to show you one game which I based my old analysis on, which starts with the move f6. And the reason I'm showing you this is that a lot of these ideas that are present in this game, the game being Ivanchuk Karyakin from YKZ 2006, will actually be implemented in the game. So e4 by Ivanchuk, king f7, bishop e3. Yeah, so this development of the bishops we will see in the game as well. Rook hc8, f3, bishop e6, rook c1, b6, bishop a6. We will see this idea also later on. Rook d8, and now b4. So this is why I'm showing you this game. This attack on black's majority on the queen side is in fact what white should be doing. Normally you would think, okay, white has 4 pawns on the king side, so he should be advancing there, and Giri will advance on the king side and eventually win the game there. But it's also very important to actually first attack black's queen side to create some weaknesses there, and Giri will also do this in the game. So it's an important concept, it's an important plan to know that in these types of positions, white should normally first attack black on the queen side to create some weaknesses, to force him on the defensive, and then advance on the other wing. So the game went c4, a4, bishop c8, bishop e2, and Ivanchuk actually went on to win this game. So now let's go back to our game. Yeah, and Niemann went rook c8, f3, f6, and now king f2. The engine suggests going e4 immediately, but I imagine that Giri wasn't entirely sure what to do to and allow the knight's jump to d4. Knight c6, bishop e3, knight d4. Yeah, and this is kind of unclear because taking on d4 weakens that pawn, but also opens the c file, and the fear here is realistic that if there is nothing concrete, white doesn't win a pawn or allows a bit too much of activity, it just would peter out to a draw. So it's understandable that he went king f2, keeping more flexibility in the position and being flexible also with his plans. So king f7 and now rook d1, following the same strategy, even again, though the engine again prefers e4, and again a sample line, let's say knight c6, bishop e3, knight d4, yeah, rook d1 and bishop e6. So the engine is just giving up a pawn for activity. Take on d4, cd4, rook d4, rook c2, and this appears to give black enough compensation. Rook b1, rook c8, and not easy to get rid of the active rook on c2. So again, understandable that Giri didn't want to provoke a crisis early on. Hence rook d1, bishop e6, and h4 with the same idea, not playing e4 too early, yeah, but obviously it's understandable that he can't do without e4 because the bishop should be developed on e3, and there is no better way to develop it. But again, keeping flexibility, keeping the postponing this moment of pushing e4, making other useful moves in the meantime. The idea of h4 is that to gain some space on the king side, maybe h5 at some point. If black goes h5, then e4 can happen, and f5 is not really an option to decrease the number of pawns on the king side because g5 is weakened. Yeah, so these subtleties, yeah, may or may not impact the game later on, but it's useful to have them in your favor. So b6 by Niemann, e4 finally, knight c6, bishop e3, and here we come to the first critical moment in the game. Giri managed to get the bishop to e3 and control the d4 square, even though sacrificing a pawn on d4, I guess, was again an option, even though from the other side it's kind of still rather vague. Yeah, you get the rook on c2, but maybe white can go king e3 and so on. So a typical way for black to play here is to try to take advantage of the light squares on the queen side, c4 and b3, And the typical move for black in these positions is the move Niemann played, which is the move knight a5, targeting both these light squares. Yeah, and then later on maybe planting a knight on b3 or bishop on b3 or c4, maybe advancing c4, b5 and so on, even though this needs to be done with some care, as advancing the pawns can actually make them weak. And for example, c4, b5 opens the diagonal for the dark squared bishop. However, knight a5 was in fact a tactical mistake which both players missed, or I mean, it wasn't easy to take advantage of it. It's a way that the engine shows, but in a game this is not so easy to understand that it's the correct way to play, and even more so that the advantage is actually so big. Yeah. So what Niemann should have done was actually go to the other side, knight e5. This does not target the b3 square, but there is this threat of knight c4, yeah, or bishop c4, exchanging one of the bishops. And this would have kept the game more or less balanced. After knight a5, Giri played the move rook d6, which is again rather vague. And the way to play was the natural move rook ac1. And the point is that if black now wants to exchange one pair of rooks with rook hd8, after the exchange of rooks on d8, there is b4 is coming. And we saw this idea from the Ivanchuk-Karyakin game. Yeah, and white is achieving the ideal scenario from that game. What Giri may have feared was knight b3, attacking the rook on c1. But after rook c3, that knight is not very stable, because f4, f5 becomes an idea to attack the bishop on b3. So to give you an idea, so let's say c4 appears good because it solidifies black's grip on the light squares, but f4 is coming, threatening f5 when the pawn on c4 is under attack. So let's say king e7, f5, bishop f7, and now suddenly e5. And it turns out that black cannot hold the position together. So the threat is obviously e6. So after f e5, check on g5, yeah, king f8, rook d7, and the black's position falls apart. A difficult line. It's really hard to look at this and actually understand that white should be looking in this direction, going f4, f5, and playing tactically for dynamism. But this is the, let's say, the objective truth in the position. And if black goes rook hd8 instead of c4, still f4 is an issue for black. f4 intending f5. So king f8, f5, bishop f7, g4, and it's clear that white has achieved a lot. So g5 can come, maybe bishop f4, e5, and so on. Again, ideal scenario for white, that where black cannot really do much on the queen side. The knight on b3 is isolated, not doing much, whereas white is advancing with his own majority. This would have given white a considerable advantage. But in the game, Giri went rook d6. And even in the playing hall, I mean, I wasn't sure what the idea was here. I mean, doubling of the rooks, fine, but the doubling of the rooks doesn't even achieve much because d7 is covered, so I'm not sure. Yeah, knight b7 was one possible move to force the rook back. Niemann played this on the next move, not immediately. Rook hd8 is another move, which, okay, white cannot avoid the exchange, but I think white was trying to exchange one pair of rooks, rook d8, rook d8, rook c1 now, with the idea of b4, even though one tempo down. And the most natural move that I was expecting was actually king e7, attacking the rook, rook a d1, yeah, now rook hd8. And again, it's hard to kind of blame the players, because it appears that exchanging all rooks maybe looks in white's favor. So let's exchange all rooks and go b4. Yeah. But after a b4, c b4, knight c4, bishop d4, king e7, the engine says just it's a dead draw. For a human, this is not so obvious because, again, these pawns are worthless. They will never advance, but the knight is actually stable on c4. Yeah. And it appears that, okay, white has this pawn majority. He can push and advance press for a long time, but the engine is just not impressed, and this should be a draw. Again, I think the decisive factor is the human factor, when this is not easily obvious to a human that this would be a draw. So perhaps Niemann wanted to avoid it and Giri wasn't against allowing it. Another option after rook hd8, and this may have worried the Niemann, is the tactical move e5. Obviously the point being that the pawn cannot be taken because of bishop g5 check. But after rook d6, ed6, now king f7, the position is double-edged. The pawn is passed and well advanced and supported, but also can become weak. b4 now, cb4, ab4, knight c4. Yeah? Pretty double-edged, yeah. But again, the engine finds a draw. For example, white can win a pawn, bishop c4, rook e1. Yeah, so the pawns are difficult to defend, but after a6, take on b6, king e6, it's just a dead draw. Yeah, the pawn is well blockaded, bishop b5, everything is safe, and black draws. But again, it's not something that's too obvious, too easy to see, and it's understandable if the players had their fears here. So Niemann played rook he8. Developing move, but still rather vague. g4 by Giri. Again, it's kind of interesting that he was reluctant to get the rook to c1 and go for the b4 push, which was, again, quite promising. He went g4, now knight b7, chasing the rook away, rook d2, knight f5. Now the players repeat move because Giri was spending quite a lot of time, so he wanted to get closer to move 40. Rook d6, knight b7, rook dd1 now, avoiding the repetition, knight a5. Again, we see this problem of actually Niemann not getting a chance in this game. Yeah, maximum he can get is a draw, and that's the end of the qualification dream. So still, this decision was hard for me to understand, to go for this type of an opening and position. So finally Giri goes rook ac1, and now Niemann commits a mistake. He plays the move king e7, whereas knight b3, rook c3, c4 was preferable. Now in this case f4, king f8 is similar to what we saw, but black somehow holds according to the engine, whereas g5 is met by knight c5, yeah, and a pawn sacrifice, rook c c1, knight d3 check, bishop d3, c d3, exchange of rooks on c8, rook c8, rook d3, check on c2, king g3, and now f5, a key move to establish blockade on the light squares. And again, the engine holds this, but for a human, pawn down, prospectless position, long defense ahead. Well, not the best of scenarios, but black's position was such that anything but long suffering was like winning the lottery, yeah. So he went king e7. Now another idea that we saw in the Ivanchuk-Karyakin game, bishop a6, rook d8, exchanging one pair of rooks, and finally b4. Exactly the same scenario from that game, yeah. And now black is in serious trouble, yeah. The attack on the queen side is difficult to parry, and white has already advanced with his own pawn majority. Knight b3, rook c3, rook d6. Already it's difficult for black, but this allows a transformation of the position, and Giri went for this, starting with b takes c5. And here, well, the engine suggests that knight c5 was better. But then again, this allows white to keep the pair of bishops, let's say bishop b5. And again, it's a very long suffering for black. I mean, white, the pawn is attacked on c5. I mean, bishop c5 is a threat. Whereas, let's say a6 forces the bishop to go away to e2 so that the rook c6 can defend the knight. But after something like, say, bishop d4, king e3, f4, and so on, this is very, very difficult for black to defend. Therefore, it's not a surprise that Niemann went for bc5. And here, Giri had a good choice, and he admitted this in the interview, post-game interview, that he said that he would never have pardoned himself for not taking the pawn if that pawn led to a win. So he had the possibility to keep the pair of bishops with bishop e2 and continue playing long term, yeah, with the pair of bishops and so forth. But he actually went for the rook b3 conversion transformation phase, where he wins the pawn. The point is that the pawn on c5 is attacked, and if black takes on b3, bishop c5 wins a pawn. This happened in the game. And here I was surprised that actually Niemann went for the pure bishop endgame. I thought that perhaps keeping the rooks was better, and it actually was, but it's no fun. Rook takes a6, bishop c5 check, king d8, rook b7, bishop d7. The only way to kind of stop the attack on the 7th rank, and now simply king e3, and then this pawn can fall, and this should be losing. And still, I thought that maybe this was better. Hard to say. The point is that after bishop b3, bishop c5, king d7, bishop d6, king d6, g5 is the only move that wins. Otherwise, black threatens to go h6, g5 and establish a blockade. But after g5 is winning, and in fact Giri already here saw the winning plan. And the winning plan consists of creating a passed pawn. So either king e3, king d4, f4, e5, or as in the game, as we shall see, bishop e6, king e3, king c5, stopping king d4, and now king f4. King d4, stopping again e5 ideas, gf6, gf6, a4. So advancing the pawn further for kind of good technique. Yeah, the further up the board, the better. And what will happen here is that white will use his bishop to chase the black bishop from the c8 or h3, c8 diagonal. Probably some maneuvering like getting it to h3, or maybe getting it somehow to g4. Yeah, chasing away the bishop and then going king f5 and attacking the pawn on f6. So this is the winning plan. So h6, a5, bishop d7, bishop e2, king c5, now rushing back to d6, but not in time because e5 happens. But instead of, let's say, bishop e6, bishop d1, bishop d7, just to show you how white manages to get rid of black's bishop on the h3, c8 diagonal, bishop b3, bishop c8, bishop f7. So the point is to go to h5 and g4. Bishop d7, bishop h5, bishop e6, bishop g4, bishop b3, and king f5, winning the second pawn and winning the game. So Niemann went king c5, but now e5 creates a second passed pawn. Yeah, king e5, ef6, king e6, f7, king f7, king e5. It's pretty elementary win. One passed pawn, but also another one is going to happen, because if black goes king e7, the pawn marches to f6, the bishop will come to c4, there will be no blockade, and then the king can go towards the pawn on a7. I mean, very impressive game for Giri, especially taking into consideration that it was a must-win game, last round of a very taxing, very difficult tournament. He missed some chances earlier on in some games, but a chance was given to him and he took it, and he really took it in a very convincing way. And it's worth noting that earlier in the tournament, he also won a very nice game with a pair of bishops against his compatriot Jordan van Forest. You should take a look at that game, even though when I chatted quickly to him after the game, he said that he was just lucky in that game because it was just a fortress for black, but Jordan wanted to be active, and Giri used the advantage of the better mobility of the bishop against the knight. So to sum up, the good technique and playing with a pair of bishops secured Giri a spot in the candidates. I think fully deserved. I think with the experience he has by now, and as he said that he now knows better how to prepare for this type of event, it would be great to have him in the candidates. So far we have only Caruana there, and most likely Pragnananda. So it will be Nakamura most likely also. So anyway, Blue Baum, yeah, it will be interesting to see these players battle it out. And as far as the endgame technique goes, I think it was a good example of how humans play these endgames. You know, it was very important to know the keeping of the flexibility of the plans, not rushing with e4, first h4, you know, this type of flexible moves, also indicating that humans are not sure of the best way course of action, so they play moves that are generally useful, and decide only on more decisive actions once things have clarified. From Niemann's perspective, really a strange game, not at all in line with how he was playing previously at the tournament. Very determined, very optimistic. Here he was just not his usual self. So I mean, hard to say, yeah. But anyway, all credit goes to Anish. So I will wrap up this video on this. I hope you enjoyed this endgame technique example. Nice illustration how to play endgames. Hope it was useful and also instructive. Thanks for watching. Yeah, and obviously, as at the end, make sure you check out my chessable courses. I just recently released the latest one, my first opening repertoire, Colovic's 1e4, and also apart from all the other courses. And obviously, if you haven't done so already, make sure you smash that subscribe button to my YouTube channel and for more great material. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you again soon. Cheers.